Do you think I'll ever speak English like them, Mom? Sarah whispered, clutching her mother's hand as they walked past a group of tourists chatting fluently in English. The little market in her small village in Indonesia felt like another planet compared to the world those tourists came from. Her mother smiled faintly but said nothing, her silence louder than words. For as long as Sarah could remember, she had been fascinated by English. She didn't understand the words, but the rhythm and flow captivated her. To her, speaking English wasn't just about knowing another language. It was a way to connect with a world far beyond the rice fields and narrow streets of her village. Sarah grew up in a humble home. Her father worked as a farmer, and her mother sold handmade crafts in the local market. They were a close-knit family, but money was always tight. Despite the hardships, Sarah's parents encouraged her to dream big, often saying, "Even if you can't fly, you can still learn to soar." Yet, in their village, speaking English seemed like an impossible dream. Few schools offered proper English classes, and even fewer students could afford them. Sarah was one of the lucky ones. Her father worked extra hours so she could attend school. Her teacher, Miss Au, introduced her to the basics of English. Sarah adored those lessons and practiced every chance she got, even if it was just repeating the alphabet under her breath while working in the fields. But tragedy struck when Sarah turned 14. Her father fell seriously ill, and the family's meager savings vanished in medical bills. Sarah had to quit school to help her mother. Each night, as her siblings slept, Sarah would sit by the dim glow of a kerosene lamp and listen to English songs on the radio. She scribbled down words that sounded familiar, creating a growing list of her magic words. Her favorite was hope. It became her mantra. One day, she confided in her best friend, Amina. "I want to speak English like the people on TV." Amina frowned. "Sarah, be realistic. We're farmers. Who will even listen to you? Focus on helping your family." Sarah nodded, but deep down, she couldn't let go of her dream. A year later, change arrived in the form of a foreign NGO. The organization came to the village to teach sustainable farming techniques. Sarah was mesmerized by the team's fluent English, their confident gestures, and the way they seemed to command attention. Summoning every ounce of courage, she approached one of the team members, a kind-looking man named Ben. "Hello, name's Sarah," she stammered. Her voice shook, and her palms were sweaty. Ben smiled warmly. "Hello, Sarah. Nice to meet you." That small interaction ignited something within her. Seeing her enthusiasm, Ben offered her a chance to work as an assistant translator. He assured her that she didn't need to be perfect, just willing to learn. Sarah hesitated. She was terrified of making mistakes. But her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Even if you can't fly, you can still learn to soar." "I'll try," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The first few weeks were humiliating. Sarah froze during meetings, fumbled with words, and mispronounced even simple phrases. Villagers laughed when she tried to translate, and some called her foolish for trying. One evening, after a particularly bad day, Sarah broke down in tears. "I'm not good enough, Mom," she sobbed. I'll never speak like them. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hands. Do you remember how you learned to walk, Sarah? You fell so many times, but you kept getting up. Why should learning English be any different? The next morning, Sarah woke up with renewed determination. She began practicing daily with Ben. He spoke slowly, repeating words until she could mimic his pronunciation. You don't have to sound perfect, Ben told her. Confidence comes from trying, not from perfection. To build her vocabulary, Sarah started labeling objects in her house with their English names. The radio became radio, the chair, chair, and so on. Her siblings teased her, but she didn't care. Months passed, and Sarah's hard work began to pay off. She could now hold basic conversations without freezing, though her confidence was still shaky. Then came the real test. Ben asked her to present their farming initiative to a group of visiting officials. I can't do it, Sarah panicked. What if I mess up? Ben placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You will mess up. That's part of learning. But you'll do great because you care. The day of the presentation arrived. Sarah's hands trembled as she stood in front of the group. She started speaking slowly, her voice barely audible. Halfway through, she mispronounced a word and froze. The room fell silent. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, and she wanted to run. But then, one of the officials smiled and said, "Take your time. You're doing well." Something shifted inside her. Sarah took a deep breath and continued. By the end of the presentation, she felt a small but undeniable sense of pride. Sarah's confidence grew with each passing day. She became the bridge between her village and the NGO, translating complex ideas into simple terms for the farmers. Her father, now recovering, often watched her with pride. One evening he said, "Sarah, when you were born, I dreamed of giving you the world. I didn't think we'd see the day when someone from our family would speak English like you do." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. For the first time, she felt that her dream wasn't just hers. It belonged to her family too. But life wasn't done testing her. Just as Sarah started to feel confident, the NGO announced that their project was ending. Ben would be leaving. "What will I do without you?" Sarah asked, panic creeping into her voice. "You've outgrown me, Sarah," Ben said with a smile. "Now it's your turn to help others." Resolution. Years later, Sarah stood in front of a classroom in the bustling city of Jakarta. She had become an English teacher, helping other young dreamers find their confidence. Her students came from all walks of life: farmers, laborers, and even small children who reminded her of her younger self. One day, a shy girl named Lila approached her after class. "Miss Sarah, do you think I'll ever speak English like you?" Sarah knelt to meet Lila's gaze. "Do you know how I learned? By making mistakes. Every time I stumbled, I picked myself up and tried again. Confidence doesn't come from knowing all the words. It comes from believing that your voice matters, no matter how many mistakes you make." As Lila smiled, Sarah saw a reflection of her younger self. Her journey had come full circle, and she couldn't have been prouder. This story of Sarah teaches us that speaking English confidently isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, courage, and the willingness to embrace mistakes. Every step, no matter how small, is progress.